Hello, this is AI X series with Future Materials Design. My name is Professor Jihan Kim, and welcome to 새내기 Seminar. So a little bit about myself. As mentioned, my name is Professor Jihan Kim, or Kim Jihan. And I'm an associate professor in CBE, and I've been here for a little bit over 7 years. And in our lab, we do computational research, which includes some of the methods such as quantum mechanical methods, classical mechanics method. And these days, we've begun to integrate machine learning, deep learning, big data, AI into our research. And we focus mostly on nanomaterials with emphasis on porous materials such as zeolites, MOFs, polymers, and 2D materials such as graphene, MOS2, and so forth. And we're interested in various energy and environmental related applications, including CO2 capture, methane hydrogen storage, sensors, drug delivery, catalysis, and so forth. So this 새내기 seminar will be sort of less about my research and more about sort of how AI is being integrated into chemical engineering, biomolecular engineering, and materials development in general. And in order to track this history, let's sort of talk about the history of science first. And science has two different pillars, experiment and theory. So you know what they are, 실험 그리고 이론. And experiments sort of as such as discovery of electrons or theories such as theory of relativity, they sort of form two different pillars of science for the very longest time. And what happened in the last 50 years or so is that a third pillar of science began to emerge, which is simulations. And they arose because largely due to the advancements in the computing technology, such that we can do subtraction, addition, multiplication, division much quickly compared to 50 years ago. And as such, we begin to tackle very complicated mathematical problems that we could not simulate or model in the past. And these become such a revolutionary field that although it shares a lot of similarities with theory, we call it the third pillars of science and call it computational simulations. So why do we do simulation and why are we interested in simulations? There are various reasons. Reason number one is we want to conduct modeling on difficult or expensive experiments. For example, if we are doing car crash studies, this is very expensive and this can be very dangerous if we have to do this. So if we simulate these crashes, then we can save a lot of money, we can save a lot of damage and so forth. Some of these experiments such as satellite launch, they're very, very expensive. And as such, we might want to do a lot of modeling and simulations before launching these onto space. So crash simulation, spaceship launchers, two of the examples on why simulations are important. And reason number two is that a lot of times we want to conduct studies on what is just impossible. So these are just impossible to do even in practice using experiments. So for example, something like volcano eruption. We want to study this, but we cannot propel the volcano to erupt. So even if you want to do this experimentally, it's just very difficult or impossible. Or something like collision from space. There are asteroids that collide from space, but how can we manipulate this in an experiment? It's just impossible to do. However, we can do this in a computer. So reason number three is, which might pertain to CBE, is that we want to observe detailed phenomena. Detailed meaning in the atomic scale. So for example, let's say there's a polymer and I stretch the polymer by giving some mechanical pressure. So it causes, this pressure causes the polymer to deform. So what happens when this deforms? If we want to look at this atomically, then we can actually run this simulation by deforming the polymer and seeing how the atoms change. And we can look at the stress and the strain and see a certain relationship. And these are difficult to do, or at least the atomistic picture is pretty much impossible to observe using experiments. So computational chemistry builds on sort of this need for doing modeling and simulations. And for computational chemistry, there are types of computational science focused on solving, as you can guess, chemical problems. So for example, if hydrogen molecule binds to the metal surface, what happens to its catalytic activities? What if you change different metal atoms? What if the surface is different? So you can model these inside the computer and you can relay this information to the experimental researchers. And the power of computational chemistry has been immense. 1957, we did modeling on 32 입자. In 2013, which is still 7 years ago, MD simulation over, I don't even know how many sort of zeros there are, but it's a large number of particles. And in year 2020, we can even do more. It's become so powerful that we can model coronaviruses, whereas with this computer, there's no way that we can model viruses. And this sort of advancements in both the hardware and software propelled big projects, both in US and all around the world, in doing something like the Materials Genome Project, where we use computational techniques, big data, all of these other things to facilitate and accelerate future materials development. So if this was the old materials development, we facilitate that by using a lot of the computational simulations. So what do we do in our research group is that we can't do everything. We just focus on nanomaterials design, okay? So these nanomaterials can be inorganic, organic, carbon-based, whatnot, and so forth. And the idea is that we can sort of design these inside the computer, test for its properties, and maybe get the optimal materials and verify our findings with experimental background. So there is a difference sort of in philosophy and the methodological approach on how an experimentalist approach these kind of problems. From an experimental chemist or material scientist point of view, you start by actually conducting the experiments. You wait for a month, you take your fancy SEM images and whatnot, and then you sort of publish your result. Computational chemists, instead of doing actual experiments, we can generate millions of materials inside these supercomputers. We screen for them, we can find the best material, and we can tell the experimentalist that these are the best materials, can you synthesize them? So the approach is different. And the major benefit of a computational research is we can do it much faster. And it turns out that this is needed because there are so many different types of materials, potentially billions materials that can be synthesized. The reason why there's such a large space of materials is that, for example, something like inorganic organic moth, we can change the linker type, we can change the topology, we can add defects, we can combine them to form composite materials. There's so many different combinations that we can do such that the material space is vast, but we only have limited amount of time. So in the past decade or so, a lot of computational researchers, they've been doing something called computational screening, where they look into very large database of materials, over millions sometimes, quickly sort of run calculations and see which ones are best. So that is the current state of research. But what has happened was that this research has sort of run into a global phenomenon of artificial intelligence. So these developments in computational method has sort of met the development in AI. And I think a lot of you know some of these examples, such as playing Go. We have an AI machine that can play Go better than any other Go players. This is detecting, I think, skin cancer. The AI can look at the images of patients and determine whether or not it will lead to skin cancer. And in this paper, I think the authors show that the neural network outperforms medical doctors. Looking into chemical reactions and finding the optimal reaction pathways to create new materials, and simulating quantum simulations using a representation of wave functions. So notice that a lot of these papers, Nature Science, have revealed that this AI research has begun to take major sort of proportions of the scientific research in different fields. So there needs to be some basic terminologies that one should know about AI, in the sense that AI is sort of the oldest and the most encompassing. And then you have machine learning and then deep learning. So these are subsets of one another. And AI is basically machines that can perform tasks that are characteristics of human intelligence. Machine learning is a specific field of AI that uses statistical techniques and a lot of data to predict and to design new stuff. And deep learning is sort of a type of machine learning that has a lot of nonlinearity and complicated deep structures within the neural network. Okay. So in terms of our research and sort of the topic at hand is what can AI do to create new materials? I say porous, but it doesn't have to be porous, new materials, okay? And a lot of these days, people use the ML approach or the machine learning approach in the sense that it provides a lot of big data of known materials. So you have a big database of materials. You tell the AI, this is a material, this is a material, this is a material, this is a material, and then you ask the AI to create a new material. And this type of approach is very powerful, and this is pretty well suited for materials development in certain sense because we have a lot of data to begin with. We have millions of materials that have been both experimentally synthesized and also have been designed using computers. So we have a lot of big data available for us. That's not a problem. And we just need to develop a sort of a intelligent scheme on generating new materials. So there are some difficulties though, because something like these big data of materials, you need to decide how you want to represent them. And something like numbers is very intuitive. If you have a number 1, handwritten 1, you can create a matrix and say wherever you see this 1, you're going to fill in black, and everywhere else you'll fill in 0. Okay, so that is sort of an intuitive way of representing these. But these atoms, they're very difficult to represent. You're not exactly sure what to do with different atom types. Should I just make a matrix? If it's a matrix, then it should be a 3D matrix. It's very memory consuming because you have to store all of this data. So what do you do? And this is an ongoing research problem. So nonetheless, if you have a good representation of this big data, then you can try to create new materials. And these days, a neural network called GAN, you don't have to know the detail, is what's being used a lot to create new materials. And this is a representation of a GAN. There is a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com. And interestingly enough, if you type in this, it'll display new pictures of human images that have been created by GAN. And you can see that these images look very, very realistic, but these people, they do not exist. And that's how fancy GAN is. So it turns out GAN is very good at creating human images, not as good as creating new materials. And there's a reason on why this is so, and this might be sort of very important, and these are somewhat of my opinion. The reason being is with human faces, it's not as restrictive as the eye can be large, nose can be pointy, mouth can be big, but they're still essentially human beings. Whereas with chemical structures and materials, you have very strict rules that need to be defined, as in your certain CH bond length has to be certain type. If it's a benzene, it has to be C atom right away. And all these sort of connections have to abide. And even if one of them fails, then you no longer have a material. So it's much easier for AI to create something like humans without knowing the rules on humans, whereas it's much more difficult to create chemical structures without explicitly knowing the rules of chemistry. So nonetheless, we have in our lab recently trained GAN to create new materials. So this is our neural network structure. I won't go into the detail. And this is what happens when we train the neural network. Initially, it looks like a mess. This is just noise. But pretty soon you see that these colors begin to sort of seclude, and these red and the yellow are the position of silicon and oxygen atoms of zeolites. So as the training persists, we see sort of a division and what looks like a material. And once the training is done, then what we can do is we can get the images that the GAN, our neural network, has created, and we can go through some modification steps on actually creating zeolites from these. And you can see that these look very similar to one another. And these are some of the rules that we use to clean up the structures. They're not important. What's important is that we can create new materials, but not everything is material. So these are sort of failed materials. They're not zeolites. They kind of look like zeolites, but they don't abide by the chemistry rules. These are more promising, and we clean up structures that are more promising within this Gaussian distribution. So once we do that, we see whether or not we created new materials. We compare to the database of materials, and we see that there's a match between existing zeolites that were not part of our training set and the zeolite created by GAN. And we have also new zeolites that are not part of any of the database. So these are some of the things that we can do. And once we know how to do these, then it's possible that AI can be used to design most of the materials in the future. So this is sort of an example of user desired materials. This is an advantage of AI in which you tell the AI what kind of property the material should have. It should have this much working capacity, it should have this much surface area, and the AI can sort of build the materials that cater towards the user desired. And this is very important, and this is what's called inverse design, where you tell the algorithm what kind of property you want, and the algorithm spits out that material. So the summary of this seminar, you don't have to know the details, is that AI research for materials design still infancy stage, but it's a growing topic, and it will be more prominent as time passes by. You need a lot of data to train the neural network, and sometimes it begs the question on whether or not it's worthwhile to collect all of this data, because data collection can be very expensive. And finally, the importance of AI research in material design is to find which problems will truly benefit from using machine learning. These days, what happens is that everyone wants to do ML, and they want to combine it into their research. However, it turns out that a lot of the problems, you don't really need ML, but people do it anyway because they want to do AI research. And right now is about the time in which we should be more judicious and careful about applying ML or AI into your research and be able to pick out which of these applications will truly benefit from AI. So this is the end of the talk. Thank you.